Do you struggle to transition from the lower part of your voice to the higher part of your voice? This is a super common struggle for lots of singers, and today we're talking about why and strategies that you can implement to make that transition from the lower part of your voice to the higher easier. Welcome back to Singing Tips with LJD Studios, the space where we break down difficult singing concepts in ways that you can actually understand so that you can have more success in your singing. If you haven't already, make sure you download my free guide, The Three-Tiered Approach to Becoming a Better Singer. The link for that is in the description. Honestly, you guys, I feel like I shouldn't be giving that away. It's sort of what I teach in the first few lessons for anyone that comes for a private lesson. So make sure you get that. It's going to give you some really great foundational concepts and exercises to help you become a better singer. And then stay tuned for my membership, which is launching soon. Here on this platform on YouTube, I'm offering lots of detailed explanations about how your voice works. But I know a lot of you are wanting exercises to go with those explanations. That's what's going to be in the membership. You'll also get direct feedback from me on your singing through little mini video lessons. So just keep an eye out for that. I'd love to get you going on that as well. But like I said, in the meantime, get that free guide. All right, without further ado, how do you transition from the lower part of your voice to the higher part of your voice with ease? When we go from low to high, to a certain extent, we need to thin the sound. So think about a heavy object. If you were trying to pick up a big, heavy object, you might be able to lift it a little bit, right? But the higher you try to take it, the more difficult it is to sustain that weight up and overhead. The same is true with sound. The heavier it is, the harder it is going to be to move it up. So we have to do something to lighten it or thin it, and that is regardless of register. I mean, one thing you can do, and this happens a lot, right? We can flip over to head voice or to falsetto. And if you're confused about these terms, see my other video, Demystifying Vocal Registers. I've got that linked in the description. But head voice and falsetto, right, are lighter registers than chest voices, for instance. So that is one thing that we can do as we transition from low to high to lighten the sound and make it easier. But if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. You can still stay in whatever register you are in, right? Like you could stay in chest voice and go up higher. You're just going to need to thin the sound a little bit to keep from straining. First of all, what does it even mean to thin the sound, right? How can you have a thin sound? It's really helpful, in my opinion, to take this concept of sound and give it something that's tangible and or something that you can see, something that's visual, so you can engage more of your senses besides just hearing, right? So when we talk about a thinner sound, that feels like something you could see, and you could almost like make something thinner, right, with your hands. So we'll get into that in a second. But first of all, I just want you to understand what is a fat sound and what's a thin sound, right? So a bigger, fatter sound would be something like this. Ah! Right? That's really big, and that works fine down low, but I tell you what, I try to do that up high, it's not going to feel great, right? So as I go higher, I have to create a thinner sound. A thinner sound would sound something like this. Ah! Right? You might even hear a little bit of what you might call nasaliness, although it's not really nasal. And if you're confused about that, see my video on twang versus nasality. I will link that in the description. But regardless of whether or not it's nasal, it's thinner. Ah, ah. And I'll tell you what, it feels lighter. It doesn't feel as heavy either, right? So that's what needs to happen as we go higher, is we need to create a thinner sound. We can do that by changing registers, which I'll talk more about in a moment, or we can do that by creating a slightly brighter vowel sound. So let's talk first about what you would do in order to thin the sound as you go higher if you don't want to change registers. As I mentioned a moment ago, you're going to need to create a thinner vowel sound. My suggestion at first would be like, let's say you're working on a song and you're going from a lower part of your voice to a higher part of your voice, and it's feeling really heavy and you're straining as you get up higher. My first suggestion would be forget what the words are to the song for a moment, and let's just practice transitioning from low to high on a fatter vowel and then gradually moving toward a thinner vowel. So your mouth shape is a kind of a good indicator of what a bigger vowel is versus a thinner, more narrow vowel, right? Like, ah, that's a big vowel. Ooh, that's a much more narrow vowel, right? Or a. Really, it's your tongue kind of doing it there, so that might be a little confusing. But in general, I would say oo, and e are going to be thinner vowels, and even more like an versus ah, right? But I think if you are not wanting to change registers, one of the best vowels you can work toward for thinning the sound would be a really small a. And I want you to think like, maybe you are Canadian. I'm not. I want you to think like that sort of, and forgive me if you are Canadian, and this, I don't know if this is like stereotypical or offensive. I hope it's not. But think like that Canadian a. It's really, so it's not a, that's big. A, it's too big. A, really small, right? So you might sing the passage, and I'm just going to do a scale. You might sing the passage. And as you start creeping up to the place where you're like, I definitely need this to get lighter, change the vowel. So you might go, ah, right? And so I can feel that that's much lighter than, ah, right? Now I'm doing this low enough that ah doesn't feel that bad up on that higher note, but ah versus a, right? You can hear again that A is a much thinner sound. So if you want a thinner sound, choose a thinner vowel. I think A is going to be a great one if you are trying to stay in chest voice. Oo and E are also great thin vowels. And feel free to try them out. They might work for you. The only difficulty with oo and E is they are so thin that they prefer a thinner register like head voice. So if you're trying to not flip over into head voice or not flip over into falsetto, oo and E might make that difficult because they're so thin. They're going to pull you toward that. So that's why I think A is better. It's big enough. It's going to keep you out of those lighter registers, but it's narrow enough that it's going to help you feel that sense of thinning the sound as you go higher. Another component to this thinner sound is twang. So as I mentioned earlier, right, I said you might have characterized that sound, that thinner sound, as also having a more nasal-like quality. Twang and nasality are different things, and again, see that other video, twang versus nasality. But suffice it to say, twang does have this like kind of brighter quality to it, and it can sound a little bit nasally, even though it's not. So one thing that can be really helpful to do is just aim for a kind of nasally sound, and don't worry too much about if it is nasal. You're just trying to show your brain like, hey, here's where that thinner space is. And once you know where that is, you can modify the sound to be less twangy or less nasally or whatever, but you first have to be willing to kind of make a sound that is a little unfinished to show your brain like this is how we get into this space, right? So again, taking this example of just doing a scale, right? And as I go up higher, if it starts to feel like it's too heavy, I'm going to make it really like right, or really kind of bright and ugly. I'm going to do like a nay. So I'm still using that A vowel, but I'm putting an N on it to help make it even twangier. And so I'm going to go nay, right? So that keeps me from going yeah, see, it doesn't feel good. Right? So you want to try to make it feel a little bit more nasally or like in your face a little, and that's what twang is. And again, I really think you should see that other video about twang. But the more twang we add to something, the more that can also sort of help thin the sound. So you don't just want a thin vowel, you want a bright vowel. Versus right? It's got that kind of twangy quality to it. Okay, so twang and thinner vowels are going to help you get up higher without feeling like you're straining. Going back to what I said earlier about creating sort of a visual component for the sound, I think it's also really helpful to add something tactile to all of this. So as you're working with trying to thin the sound as you go higher, whether it's a passage from a song or a scale or an exercise or whatever, I think it helps to just take your hands and do this. Okay, so now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go from an ah to an A vowel. I'm going to make that vowel really bright and really twangy, and I'm even going to put an N on the front of it to help with that. When I want the sound to get thinner, I'm also going to take my hands and narrow them to create more reinforcement to my brain of I want the sound to do this, not this, as I go higher, right? So now I'm going to go, ah, nay, nay, nay. Now I'm a very visual and tactile person, so that made a huge difference for me. That made it a lot easier, okay? So adding hand gestures to these things, like what do you want the sound to do? Where do you want it to go? Show it. Show your brain with your hands where you want that sound to go. So in this case, we want it to narrow and come forward. And so we're going to take our hands and we're going to move them like this as we go up higher. And that should help in combination with a thinner vowel and a twangy consonant on the front. Okay, the other way to help lighten the sound as you go higher is obviously just to transition to a different register. But sometimes we get stuck. We get stuck in this heavy mechanism. And so we go up and we want to flip. We want to go, ah, but we get stuck and we can't make that flip occur. Part of that has to do with movement in the larynx. And I did another video on that, on what is the larynx and what should it be doing when you're singing. Don't remember if that's the official title, but I'll link it in the description as well. But your larynx needs to move when we change registers to reconfigure the vocal cords into a slightly different setting. And if it gets stuck or locked, that transition is not going to occur. So this is where I think movement through other parts of your body can be really helpful. So again, we want to choose a vowel that's also going to encourage that flip. Oo and E are going to be your best vowels for flipping over into head voice or to falsetto. And if you're going to do oo, make sure you really, really, really round your lips. If you're going to do E, make sure you don't do this, but that your tongue, E, 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 comes forward. E, 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 rather than E, E, E. Okay? So you really want to make sure you're making those vowels in the correct way. And I think actually in my video about tongue loosening, I talk about that E vowel and how to do that with your tongue. So if that's confusing to you, see the video on tongue loosening exercises. I will link that in the description too. You just spent all day on this channel, which is the goal. But you suffice it to say, you want to choose that really narrow vowel, oo or E, to help you flip over. In addition to that, the larynx needs to either tilt forward or lift up. Right? And if it kind of gets stuck in this like down and back position, that's what makes it hard. So as you go toward that higher note, wherever you want that flip to occur, do something like this, like you're falling forward. All right? If you want, you could even fold all the way forward. I find that's really helpful for people sometimes. But so I might do something like this. And let my whole head just fall forward. That's going to help encourage the larynx to move forward as well. And you could add your hands to it too. Whatever. Okay. So oo and E to help you get into head voice or falsetto. And then let your body fall forward to help encourage your larynx to tilt or rise or do what it needs to do in order for you to make that transition. Okay, so that's another way that you can start to lighten the sound as you go up higher. So once you have made the decision about whether or not you're going to flip registers or try to stay in the same register, let's say you've practiced it using the vowels that help you get to the space you want to go. Now, what do you do when the song that you're working on has a vowel that's not conducive to what it is you're trying to do, right? Like I just told you, choose a thinner vowel. Well, you don't get to choose the words to the song usually. So what are you going to do if it's an ah vowel, right? Like if the word up there is song or whatever, right? How are you going to handle that? Again, I would suggest that you first just try a different vowel, because what that's going to do is it's going to show you the path, right? If you've never made it up there in a way that feels good, you're basically throwing darts at a dartboard in the dark. When you try it on a vowel that makes it easier, now at least the lights are on. You can see what you're aiming for, and maybe you even get it a few times, right? And then once you're really good at it on those vowels that make it easier, you can go back and try it on that bigger vowel knowing that you're aiming for this particular sensation that you've already experienced on that more narrow vowel. So for instance, if I go, ah, okay, I feel that. I feel it right here. So now I'm going to stay on an ah, and I'm going to aim for the same feeling. Ah, I aimed for the same feeling, right? The other thing you can do is remember that within each vowel, there are lots of colors that you could choose. I can go ah, or I can go ah. Those are both ah vowels, but they have very different colors to them. So if the high note is on a big vowel like ah, that doesn't mean you need to sing ah. You can sing ah, ah. You can sort of modify it towards something that is brighter and thinner and twangier, right? So that would be the next step, is establish what is the vowel that I have to sing up there ultimately, and how can I still make that vowel a little bit brighter and thinner. Easiest way to do it is just think a little bit more nasal, a little bit that twangier sound. Ah versus ah, right? It's going to feel like it's more here versus here, and that's going to help you thin the sound. I hope that helps you guys get some strategies for tackling whatever song it is you're working on, whatever exercise it is you're working on. I always think it's so helpful to know the why behind these things, because then you can be empowered to make it your own. You're not just stuck with whatever exercise somebody gave you. You can experiment and play and figure things out a little bit more easily on your own because you know the why behind it. Just remember, choose the right vowel for the job, whether you want to stay in the same register or flip. You need to pick a thinner vowel as you go higher, and then add a little bit of twang, especially if you're not trying to flip, and add some movement to help reinforce to your brain and to your body that this is the direction you want the sound to go. Good luck and happy singing.